The crack of a gunshot echoed through the dusty town of Redemption Creek, Montana Territory, 1875, as Katherine Cole ducked behind a water trough, her heart hammering in her chest. This wasn't how she'd imagined her life would turn out, hiding from a murderous land baron who wanted her dead because she refused to sell her father's ranch. The irony wasn't lost on her that just months ago she'd been teaching proper young ladies in Boston about literature and mathematics, not dodging bullets in a frontier town gone mad. "Miss, you all right?" The deep voice came from above her, and Katherine looked up to see a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He crouched beside her, his lean frame moving with the practiced ease of someone who knew his way around trouble. "I'm fine," she lied, pressing her hand against the tear in her sleeve where the bullet had grazed her. "Just a scratch." The man's eyes narrowed as he caught sight of the blood seeping between her fingers. Without asking permission, he gently moved her hand and examined the wound. "That needs tending." His voice was calm, like he dealt with bullet wounds every day. Perhaps he did. "I don't have time," Katherine whispered urgently. "Whitfield's men are after me. I need to leave town." The stranger nodded toward the far end of the street where 3 mounted men were systematically checking buildings. "Those the men you're worried about?" Katherine nodded, trying to control the trembling that threatened to overtake her body. "Name's Thomas Everett," he said, checking the chambers of his revolver. "Most folks call me Tom." "Katherine Cole," she replied, wincing as she adjusted her position. "Well, Miss Cole, looks like you're in a spot of trouble. Let's get you somewhere safe first, then figure out what's next." Before Katherine could protest, Tom had helped her to her feet and led her through a narrow alley between buildings. They moved quickly but carefully, avoiding the main streets until they reached a modest livery stable at the edge of town. "Wait here," he instructed, leaving her concealed behind some hay bales while he saddled 2 horses with remarkable speed. "I can't pay you," Katherine blurted out when he returned. "They burned my ranch. Everything I had was in that house." Tom's expression remained unchanged as he helped her mount a sturdy chestnut mare. "We'll worry about that later. Right now, we need distance between us and those men." They rode hard until the sun began to set, the landscape changing from dusty plains to rolling foothills dotted with pine trees. Katherine's arm throbbed, and exhaustion weighed on her like a physical burden, but she didn't complain. When Tom finally signaled for them to stop by a small creek, she practically fell from the saddle. "Let me see that arm," he said, helping her sit on a flat rock near the water's edge. From his saddlebag, he produced a small medical kit. "You a doctor?" she asked, trying to distract herself as he cleaned the wound. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No, madam. Just learned what I needed to stay alive. Out here, a man who can't tend his own wounds doesn't last long." "And what are you exactly, Mr. Everett?" "A lawman. Used to marshal over in Wyoming Territory. Now I just drift." His hands were gentle despite their roughness as he bandaged her arm. "What did you do to get Whitfield so riled up?" Katherine's throat tightened. "I inherited my father's ranch when he died last month. Whitfield wants the water rights. When I refused to sell, his men started making threats. Last night, they burned everything to the ground." Tom's jaw tightened. "I've heard about Whitfield. Man thinks he owns half the territory." "I don't know what to do," Katherine admitted, the full weight of her situation finally crashing down on her. "I have nowhere to go." Tom finished tying off her bandage and looked at her, really looked at her, his eyes softening. "Then I'll take you everywhere." The simple declaration, spoken without flourish or expectation, struck Katherine to her core. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied, standing up to gather wood for a fire. "I know you're brave enough to stand up to Whitfield, and that makes you worth helping in my book." As the night settled around them, Tom built a small fire and prepared a basic meal of beans and jerky. Katherine watched him move with practiced efficiency, wondering about the life that had shaped this man. "You said you were a marshal before," she ventured. "Why did you leave?" Tom was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, His voice was distant. I tracked a gang of outlaws for months. When I finally caught up to them, I found they'd taken a family hostage. Things went bad. The outlaws died, but so did the family. Wife, husband, and their boy. He stared into the fire. Couldn't wear the badge after that. I'm sorry, Katherine whispered. It was 3 years ago. Tom passed her a tin cup of coffee. What about you? What brought a woman like you out to Montana Territory? Katherine sipped the strong brew before answering. My father. After my mother died, he couldn't stand Boston anymore. Said he needed open sky and honest work. I stayed behind to finish my education and became a teacher. When his letters stopped coming, I got worried. By the time I arrived, he was already dying. Consumption? Katherine nodded. He made me promise to keep the ranch, said it would be my future. A bitter laugh escaped her. Some future. Less than a month later, it's all gone. Not everything, Tom said quietly. You're still here. That's something. They fell into a comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire and the night sounds of the wilderness creating a strange sense of peace despite their circumstances. Katherine couldn't remember the last time she had felt safe, yet somehow, in the company of this stranger, she did. Morning came with a chill that penetrated Katherine's bones, despite the blanket Tom had given her. She woke to find him already up, brewing coffee and studying a worn map. What's the plan? She asked, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Tom handed her a cup of coffee. Whitfield won't stop looking for you around here. We need to get farther out, maybe cross into Idaho Territory. And then what? I can't run forever. No, Tom agreed. But running now keeps you alive so we can figure out a better plan later. They broke camp quickly and rode west, keeping to less traveled paths. Tom proved to be a skilled guide, finding water and game when needed, avoiding other travelers when possible. As days stretched into a week, Katherine found herself adapting to life on the trail. Her hands, once soft from teaching, grew calloused from handling reins and helping with camp duties. The burning pain of loss remained, but alongside it grew something unexpected, a sense of freedom she'd never known in her structured life back east. On their 8th night together, camped in a protected valley with mountains looming in the distance, Katherine finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why did you really help me, Mr. Everett? The truth. Please. Tom looked up from cleaning his rifle, his expression unreadable in the firelight. I told you. You said I was brave for standing up to Whitfield. But plenty of brave people die every day without strangers risking their lives to save them. A long moment passed before Tom set his rifle aside. 2 years ago, I was tracking a man who'd robbed a bank in Cheyenne. Trail led me to a small homestead where a woman and her daughter were being held. The woman had refused to tell the outlaw where her husband kept their savings. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. By the time I got there, it was too late for her. The little girl was hiding under the porch, witnessed the whole thing. Katherine's heart constricted. What happened to her? I took her to her grandparents in Denver. But I'll never forget the look in her eyes. Tom met Katherine's gaze directly. When I saw you behind that water trough, something in your eyes reminded me of her. Different circumstances, but the same look, someone who needs a fighting chance. The honesty in his answer touched Katherine deeply. Thank you for giving me that chance. The next morning, they crossed into Idaho Territory. The landscape grew more rugged, with dense forests and steep mountains replacing the open plains of Montana. Tom seemed more relaxed once they crossed the border, though he remained vigilant. There's a small settlement about a day's ride from here, he explained as they traveled. Fellow I know runs the general store. Might be able to help us get supplies and information. What kind of information? Whether Whitfield's reach extends this far, for one, and if there's any work to be had, our funds won't last forever. Katherine hadn't considered the financial burden her presence placed on Tom. I'm sorry. I should find a way to earn my keep. Tom shook his head. We'll manage. You any good with numbers? I taught mathematics, among other subjects. That might come in handy. Samuel the storekeeper is good-hearted but terrible with his ledgers. The settlement of Pine Creek turned out to be little more than a cluster of buildings, serving the needs of miners and trappers in the area. Samuel Donovan's general store was the largest structure, a 2-story building that doubled as his home. The storekeeper, a round-faced man with a bushy beard, greeted Tom like an old friend. "Thomas Everett, thought you might be dead by now," Samuel boomed, pumping Tom's hand enthusiastically. "Not for lack of trying," Tom replied with a rare smile. He introduced Katherine, explaining only that she was a friend in need of safe passage. Samuel gave them both appraising looks but asked no questions. "Well, any friend of Tom's is welcome here. I've got a spare room upstairs you can use." Over dinner that evening, Samuel shared news of the region, including rumors about Whitfield's growing influence. "Man's buying up judges and politicians like they're penny candy," Samuel said grimly. "Word is he's looking to control all the water access from Montana down into Wyoming." "Has he sent men this far west?" Tom asked. Samuel shook his head. "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. A man like that doesn't stop until he owns everything he can see." Katherine felt a familiar fear creeping back. "So we're still not safe?" "Nowhere's completely safe," Tom said quietly, "but we've got time to think now." Later that night, after Samuel had retired to his quarters, Katherine found Tom on the store's front porch, smoking a cigarette and staring at the stars. "I've been thinking," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter against the mountain chill. "Perhaps I should go back." Tom turned to her with a frown. "To Montana? That's suicide." "Not to the ranch. To Boston. I still have friends there, former colleagues. I could start over." "Is that really what you want?" Tom asked, his voice carefully neutral. Katherine considered the question honestly. "No," she finally admitted, "but I can't keep running forever, and I can't expect you to keep protecting me. I don't recall complaining about the arrangement. You shouldn't have to upend your life because of my problems." Tom extinguished his cigarette against the porch railing. "Katherine, my life was already upended long before I met you. At least now I'm doing something worthwhile." The way he said her name, not Miss Cole, as he had for days, sent an unexpected warmth through her. "What about your life? Your plans?" "Didn't have many to speak of. Drifting suits me fine." He hesitated, then added, "Though I admit it's been less lonely these past days." The admission hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Katherine found herself stepping closer to him, drawn by something she couldn't name. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Tom's eyes searched hers in the dim light from the store windows. For a moment, Katherine thought he might reach for her, but instead he simply nodded and stepped back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out our next move." Katherine spent the next day helping Samuel organize his ledgers while Tom made inquiries around the settlement. As she worked, Katherine found herself wondering about Tom's past. He'd shared fragments, but there remained so much she didn't know about the man who had risked everything for her. Samuel, noticing her distraction, chuckled. "He's a good man, Tom Everett. Saved my life once, back when he was still wearing a badge." "How?" "I was transporting goods to Cheyenne when my wagon broke down in bad country. Group of road agents came upon me, would have taken everything, including my life. If Tom hadn't happened by." Samuel shook his head at the memory. 3 against 1, and he still managed to run them off. "Man's got 9 lives, I swear." "He mentioned he stopped being a marshal after an incident with some outlaws," Katherine said carefully. Samuel's expression sobered. "The Harlan gang. Nasty business. Tom tracked them for months, finally cornered them at a farmstead. Story goes they'd already killed the farmer when Tom arrived, then used the wife and child as shields. Shootout was bad. By the time it was over, only Tom was left standing." He sighed heavily. "Some say he could have done more to save the family. Tom believes that more than anyone." "That's terrible," Katherine whispered. "Changed him. Used to be more open, laughed easier. Now he keeps to himself, takes odd jobs, moves on before he gets too comfortable anywhere. The insight into Tom's character made Catherine's heart ache for him. It also explained his willingness to help her, perhaps in saving her. He was trying to atone for those he couldn't save. When Tom returned that evening, he brought surprising news. "There's a silver mine about 20 miles north that's looking for workers," he announced over dinner. "Pay is decent, and they've got a small community building up around it. Might be a place we could settle for a while, at least until we figure out something more permanent." "We?" Katherine asked, unable to keep the hope from her voice. Tom met her eyes. "Unless you'd rather I move on." "No," she said quickly. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said simply. "Besides, I promised to take you everywhere, didn't I?" "Haven't even started on that yet." The silver mine at Eagle Mountain was larger than Katherine had expected, with over 50 men working the tunnels and another 20 or so handling the above-ground operations. The settlement that had sprung up around it consisted of crude cabins, a company store, and a small saloon that doubled as a meeting hall. The mine manager, Joseph Ellis, was initially skeptical about hiring Tom until he demonstrated his proficiency with explosives, a skill Katherine hadn't known he possessed. As for Katherine herself, Ellis was surprisingly receptive to her offer to teach the miners' children. "Got about 15 youngsters here with nothing but mischief to occupy them," Ellis explained. "Parents have been asking for schooling, but teachers aren't exactly lining up for positions this far into the mountains." And so, within days of their arrival, Katherine found herself with a classroom of sorts, the back room of the saloon during daylight hours, and 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. The work was challenging but fulfilling, reminding her why she'd chosen teaching in the first place. Tom, meanwhile, worked in the mine 6 days a week, handling the delicate work of setting charges to expand the tunnels. They saw each other in the evenings, sharing meals in the small cabin they had been assigned. At first, Katherine had been concerned about the propriety of their living arrangement, but in the isolated mining camp, conventional social rules seemed less important than practicality. As weeks turned into months, they fell into a comfortable routine. Katherine expanded her teaching to include evening classes for miners who wanted to learn reading and arithmetic. Tom gained a reputation for reliability and steady work. They became known in the camp as a pair, though the nature of their relationship remained ambiguous to others and increasingly to Katherine herself. There were moments when she caught Tom watching her with an expression that made her heart race, and times when their hands would brush accidentally, creating a tension that neither seemed ready to acknowledge. They had become friends, confidants even, but something unspoken lingered between them. Winter arrived early in the mountains, bringing heavy snowfall that effectively cut off the settlement from the outside world for days at a time. The miners continued their work, and Katherine her teaching, but the enforced isolation created a camaraderie among the camp's residents that culminated in impromptu gatherings in the saloon on particularly cold nights. It was during one such gathering, with music from a miner's fiddle filling the room, that Tom surprised Katherine by asking her to dance. "I'm not very good," he admitted as he led her to the cleared area serving as a dance floor. "Neither am I," Katherine replied, suddenly aware of how close they stood. "Boston society would be horrified by my lack of grace." Tom's hand settled at her waist, warm and steady. "Seems to me Boston society missed out on a lot about you." They moved together awkwardly at first, finding their rhythm as the fiddle played a slow, melancholy tune. Katherine was acutely conscious of Tom's proximity, the scent of pine soap and the lingering mineral smell from the mines that clung to his clothes. "Are you happy here?" he asked suddenly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. The question caught Katherine off guard. Yes, I think I am. More than I expected to be." "Even though it's not what you planned?" Katherine thought about her life before the structured days teaching proper young ladies, the evenings spent in quiet solitude, the future that had stretched before her, predictable and secure. Then she considered the past months, the danger, the uncertainty, but also the freedom, the purpose she'd found, and the man now holding her as they danced. "Sometimes what we don't plan becomes more important than what we do," she said softly. "I never planned to come west originally, but if my father hadn't, I never would have inherited the ranch. If Whitfield hadn't burned it down, I never would have met you." She met his eyes directly. "Some unplanned things are worth the trouble they bring." Tom's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Katherine." Whatever he might have said was interrupted by a commotion at the door. A snowbound traveler had arrived, half frozen but bearing mail and news from the outside world. The dance forgotten, everyone gathered to hear what information he brought. Most of the news concerned typical frontier matters: Indian treaties, railroad progress, political developments back east. But one item made Katherine's blood run cold. "Heard about that land baron in Montana Territory, Whitfield?" the traveler said between gulps of whiskey. "Word is, he's offering a substantial reward for information about a woman who stole from him. Katherine something or other. Schoolteacher turned thief, they say." Tom's hand found Katherine's in the crowd, squeezing it reassuringly as the traveler continued. $500 for information leading to her capture. Man's determined, I'll give him that. That night, back in their cabin, Katherine paced anxiously while Tom stoked the fire. "He's not going to stop," she said, hugging herself against a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "He'll keep spreading lies about me, keep looking until he finds me." "The snow will keep us isolated for months yet," Tom reasoned. "By spring, maybe he'll have moved on to other concerns." "You don't believe that any more than I do." Katherine stopped pacing to look at him directly. "Whitfield wants my father's land because it controls access to the valley's water. He'll never stop until he gets it or until I'm dead." Tom's expression hardened. "Then we need to find a way to stop him." "How?" "He has money, influence, men willing to do his bidding." "What do we have?" "The truth, for one thing." Tom stood and crossed to her. "Your father's deed to the land, legal documentation. All burned in the fire. There would be records at the Territorial Land Office. Deeds are registered there." Hope flickered briefly in Katherine's chest before reality extinguished it. Even with proof, how would we fight him? Any judge or marshal in the territory is probably in his pocket by now. Tom was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe we need to look beyond the territory then. The federal government might take interest if they knew about Whitfield's methods. Land fraud, intimidation, possibly murder, those are serious charges." "You're talking about going to the federal authorities?" "It would mean traveling to Denver, maybe even Washington." Katherine considered the idea. "It would be dangerous. If Whitfield's men recognized me, we'd be careful." Tom took her hands in his touch steadying her. "Katherine, you can keep running, try to build a new life somewhere else, or you can fight for what's rightfully yours. Either way, I'll be with you." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk so much for me?" Tom's eyes held hers, no longer guarded. "Because somewhere along the way, your fight became mine. Because I care about what happens to you." His voice dropped lower. "Because I care about you." The admission hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing at once. Katherine felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by a force as inevitable as gravity. "Tom," she breathed, and it was both a question and an answer. He released her hands only to frame her face gently with his palms. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his face inches from hers. Instead, Katherine closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepening as Tom pulled her closer. Katherine's arms wound around his neck, her body molding against his as years of propriety and restraint melted away under the heat of their shared desire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Tom rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for a long time." "Why didn't you?" A rueful smile crossed his face. "Wasn't sure you'd welcome it. You're an educated woman, Katherine. I'm just a former lawman with blood on his hands." You're the man who saved me, who stood by me when anyone else would have walked away." Katherine touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of day-old stubble beneath her fingers. "You're the man I've fallen in love with." The words, once spoken, seemed to release something in Tom. He kissed her again, more urgently this time, walking her backward until her spine met the cabin wall. His hands traveled down her sides to her waist, holding her firmly as his mouth moved to her neck. Katherine gasped at the sensation, her fingers tangling in his hair. "Tom," she whispered, his name a plea on her lips. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his own dark with desire but questioning. "Are you sure?" In answer, Katherine took his hand and led him toward the narrow bed they'd taken turns sleeping in for months. Tonight, there would be no taking turns. Dawn broke clear and cold, sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window to fall across the bed where Katherine and Tom lay entwined. Katherine woke first, momentarily confused by the weight of an arm around her waist and the unfamiliar sensation of bare skin against her own. Then memory returned, bringing with it a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the blankets covering them. She turned carefully in Tom's embrace to study his face in sleep. Relaxed, he looked younger, the lines of worry and vigilance temporarily erased. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and Katherine resisted the urge to brush it back, not wanting to wake him. But Tom stirred anyway, his eyes opening to meet hers. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered in their depths, as if he feared she might regret what had happened between them. Katherine dispelled his doubts by leaning forward to press a soft kiss to his lips. "Good morning," she murmured. A slow smile spread across Tom's face. "Morning." His hand traced the curve of her hip beneath the blankets. "No regrets?" "None," she assured him. "You." In answer, Tom pulled her closer, his kiss deepening until Katherine was breathless. "Does that answer your question?" he asked, his voice rough with renewed desire. Later, as they shared coffee by the fire, they returned to the question of what to do about Whitfield. "We can't leave until spring anyway," Tom reasoned. "The passes won't be clear until then. That gives us time to plan, to gather what information we can." Katherine nodded, cradling her cup between her hands for warmth. "If we're going to appeal to federal authorities, we'll need more than just my word against his. We need evidence of his crimes. Samuel might help. He knows people throughout the territories, traders and travelers who hear things, and there must be others who've been hurt by Whitfield, other ranchers who've been forced off their land. If we could find them, get their testimony," Katherine's mind raced with possibilities, "we could build a case against him." Tom reached across the table to take her hand. "It won't be easy, and it won't be quick. Are you prepared for that?" Katherine thought about the easy path disappearing, starting over somewhere new under a different name, letting go of her past and her father's legacy. Then she thought about all the others who might suffer if Whitfield's power went unchecked. "Yes," she said firmly, "I want to fight. For my land, for justice, for a future that's ours to choose." Tom's smile was worth every risk they would face. "Then we'll fight together." The winter months passed in a blur of work and planning. Katherine continued teaching, finding joy in her students' progress despite the uncertainty of her own future. Tom worked in the mines by day, and in the evenings they strategized, sent carefully worded messages to contacts Tom trusted, and built their case against Whitfield piece by piece. Their relationship deepened as well, the initial passion maturing into something more profound. They learned each other's habits and histories, shared dreams and fears, and wove their separate lives into a single, stronger whole. As spring approached, bringing with it the prospect of passable roads, their plans took more concrete form. Tom had received word from a former colleague now working as a federal marshal in Denver who was willing to hear their case against Whitfield. They would need to travel there as soon as the mountain passes cleared. The night before their planned departure, a late-season snowstorm hit the mining camp, forcing everyone to shelter in place. Katherine and Tom stayed in their cabin, listening to the wind howl outside while making final preparations for their journey. "I've been thinking," Tom said as he cleaned his revolver by lamplight. After this is all over, regardless of how it turns out with Whitfield, we should consider what comes next. Katherine looked up from the bundle of clothes she was packing. What do you mean? Tom set the gun aside and crossed to where she sat. I mean us, our future. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. Katherine, these past months have been the happiest of my life, despite everything. I don't want to lose you once this business with Whitfield is settled. Katherine's heart raced. What are you saying, Tom? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want to build a life with you, wherever that might be. His eyes held hers, serious and sincere. I'm asking if you'll marry me. Joy burst through Katherine, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, I'll marry you. Tom's face lit with a smile brighter than any she'd seen from him before. He pulled her into his arms, his kiss fierce with promise and devotion. When they finally broke apart, Katherine laughed through her tears. Where will we go? What will we do? Anywhere, everything. Tom's thumbs wiped the moisture from her cheeks. Remember what I told you that first day? You said you had nowhere to go, and I promised to take you everywhere. I remember, Katherine said softly. It seemed impossible then. Not impossible, just a promise I intend to keep. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape glittering with fresh snow that would delay their departure by another day. They took the time to share their news with friends they'd made at the mining camp, including Margaret Ellis, the mine manager's wife, who had become Katherine's closest confidant. I knew it, Margaret exclaimed, hugging Katherine tightly. The way that man looks at you, it was only a matter of time. Katherine blushed. We'll have to wait until after the situation with Whitfield is resolved, but yes, we're engaged. Margaret's expression sobered. Be careful, both of you. Men like Whitfield don't play by any rules but their own. We will, Katherine promised. But this isn't just about us anymore. If Whitfield isn't stopped, how many others will suffer? The journey to Denver was arduous despite the coming of spring. Melting snow had turned mountain trails to mud, and twice they had to detour around flooded creek crossings. They traveled with a group of miners headed to Denver for supplies, providing safety in numbers but slowing their progress. Denver itself was a shock after months in the isolated mining camp. The city buzzed with activity construction everywhere, streets crowded with wagons and pedestrians, the constant noise of commerce and conversation. Katherine felt overwhelmed by it all, grateful for Tom's steady presence at her side as they made their way to the federal building. Marshal James Wilson was a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement, his face weathered by years in the sun and his left arm ending in an empty sleeve pinned neatly at the shoulder. He greeted Tom with genuine warmth before turning his shrewd gaze on Katherine. So you're the schoolteacher who's got Whitfield in such a state, he remarked, gesturing for them to sit in his sparse office. Man's offering $1,000 now for information on your whereabouts. Katherine's stomach clenched. The price has gone up. Tends to happen when folks elude capture. Wilson leaned back in his chair. Tom here says you've got evidence of land fraud, intimidation, possibly murder. That's a hefty list of accusations against a man with Whitfield's connections. Everything we have is documented, Tom said, placing a leather portfolio on Wilson's desk. Statements from other ranchers who were forced out, records of water rights that were illegally transferred, accounts of intimidation tactics used by Whitfield's men. Wilson spent nearly an hour reviewing the materials, his expression growing grimmer with each page he turned. Finally, he looked up at them. This is compelling, but Whitfield's reach extends into the territorial courts. To make these charges stick, we'd need federal intervention. That's why we came to you, Katherine said. Can you help us? Wilson stroked his gray beard thoughtfully. There's a circuit judge due in Denver next week, Judge Hammond. He's known for being incorruptible, and he takes a dim view of the kind of frontier justice Whitfield's been dispensing. He tapped the portfolio. With this evidence and your testimony, Hammond might issue warrants for Whitfield and his key men. Hope flickered in Katherine's chest. And then? Then I put together a team to serve those warrants and bring Whitfield in to face charges. Wilson fixed them both with a serious look. But understand this, once we move against him, things will get dangerous. Whitfield won't go down without a fight, and he has men loyal to him throughout the territory." Tom's hand found Katherine's, squeezing reassuringly. "We understand the risks, James. We've been living with them for months now." Wilson nodded slowly. "All right, then. We'll prepare to present your case to Judge Hammond when he arrives. In the meantime, I suggest you both keep a low profile. Denver's a big city, but word travels, and Whitfield has eyes everywhere." They found lodging in a modest boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Holloway, who asked no questions when they registered as Mr. and Mrs. Everett. Their room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window overlooking a quiet side street. "Wife already," Tom teased gently as he set their bags down. "How does it feel?" Katherine smiled, despite her lingering anxiety about their situation. "Like a promise of things to come." She moved to the window, gazing out at the unfamiliar city. "Do you think Wilson will really be able to help us?" Tom came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "James is a good man, and he's got the authority of the federal government behind him. If anyone can bring Whitfield to justice, it's him. And if he can't? Then we find another way," Tom said simply. "I told you before, this is our fight now, together. Whatever happens, we face it side by side." Katherine leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Side by side," she echoed. The week of waiting for Judge Hammond's arrival stretched Katherine's nerves to their breaking point. They ventured out only when necessary, always vigilant for any sign of Whitfield's men. Tom purchased a small revolver for Katherine and spent hours teaching her to use it in their room, the lessons punctuated by Mrs. Holloway's disapproving looks at the noise. "I hope I never need to use this," Katherine said, holding the weapon awkwardly. "So do I," Tom replied, "but I'd rather you have it and not need it than need it and not have it." Judge Hammond arrived on schedule, a formidable figure with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for swift, impartial justice. Marshal Wilson arranged a private meeting where Katherine and Tom presented their evidence and testimony. The judge listened without interruption, his expression remaining neutral until they had finished. "Miss Cole, Mr. Everett, what you've presented here suggests a pattern of criminal behavior that cannot be ignored," Hammond said finally. "Marshal Wilson, prepare warrants for the arrest of Edward Whitfield and his associates on charges of land fraud, criminal intimidation, arson, and conspiracy to commit murder." Relief washed over Katherine so strongly she nearly wept. Tom's arm around her shoulder steadied her as the judge continued. "I'll remain in Denver until this matter is resolved. Bring Whitfield before me as soon as he's apprehended." Hammond fixed his penetrating gaze on Katherine. "Miss Cole, your courage in bringing these charges is commendable. Too many allow men like Whitfield to operate unchecked out of fear or a misplaced sense that frontier justice is somehow separate from the law of our nation." "Thank you, Your Honor," Katherine managed, her voice thick with emotion. As they left the federal building, Tom pulled Katherine into a sheltered alcove, his face alight with vindication. "We did it. The warrants will be issued tomorrow." "It doesn't feel real," Katherine admitted, "after all this time running and hiding." "It's just the beginning," Tom cautioned. "Whitfield won't surrender easily." "But it is a beginning," Katherine insisted, "more than we had yesterday." They celebrated quietly that evening with a proper dinner at a restaurant near their boarding house, allowing themselves one night of normality before the next phase of their fight began. Walking back arm in arm under the gaslights, Katherine found herself imagining a future where such evenings were commonplace, where danger didn't lurk around every corner, where they could build a life together in peace. The sound of approaching footsteps behind them shattered that peaceful vision. Tom tensed beside her, his hand moving toward his holstered revolver. "Keep walking," he murmured. "There's an alley up ahead. When I say run, go there." Katherine's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her pace steady, her own hand slipping into her pocket where the small revolver Tom had bought her was concealed. The footsteps quickened, closing the distance. Just as they passed the mouth of the alley, Tom hissed, "Run!" and spun to face whoever was following them. Katherine darted into the darkness of the alley, drawing her revolver and pressing herself against the brick wall. She heard Tom's voice, low and dangerous. "That's far enough." A man's laugh drifted to her ears. "Easy there, Everett. Just wanted a word with you and the lady." "How do you know my name?" Tom demanded. "Let's just say we have mutual acquaintances. Mr. Whitfield sends his regards." Katherine's blood ran cold. How had Whitfield found them so quickly? "Miss Cole is under federal protection now," Tom said evenly. "Warrants have been issued for Whitfield's arrest. If you're smart, you'll distance yourself from him before you're named as an accomplice." Another laugh. "Warrants don't mean much in the territories, as I'm sure you know. Besides, Mr. Whitfield is willing to be reasonable. All Miss Cole has to do is sign over her water rights, and all this unpleasantness can be forgotten." "And if she refuses?" "Then things get considerably less pleasant for both of you." The threat hung in the air, naked and crude. Katherine tightened her grip on the revolver, willing her hands not to shake. "Here's my counteroffer," Tom said, his voice deceptively calm. "You go back to Whitfield and tell him to surrender himself to Marshal Wilson. If he cooperates, the judge might show leniency." The man snorted. "You really don't understand who you're dealing with, do you? Whitfield doesn't surrender. He takes what he wants." "Not this time," Tom replied. "Now walk away while you still can." A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant sounds of the city. Then, "This isn't over, Everett. Not by a long shot." Footsteps receded, and moments later Tom appeared at the mouth of the alley. "Katherine?" She rushed to him, the revolver still clutched in her hand. "I'm here. Are you all right?" Tom nodded grimly. "For now. But Whitfield knows we're in Denver. We need to get to Wilson." Marshal Wilson took the news of Whitfield's threat seriously, immediately assigning 2 deputies to guard Katherine and Tom. They moved from the boarding house to rooms above the federal building, where security could be better maintained. "How did he find us so quickly?" Katherine asked as they settled into their new quarters. Wilson shook his head. "Whitfield has informants everywhere, stagecoach drivers, telegraph operators, hotel clerks. Someone must have recognized you or overheard something." "What about the warrants?" Tom pressed. "When will you serve them?" "I'm assembling a team now," Wilson assured him. "We'll ride for Whitfield's ranch tomorrow. With luck, we'll have him in custody within the week." But luck, it seemed, was not on their side. The next day brought news that shook their carefully constructed plans. Whitfield had disappeared from his ranch, taking his most loyal men with him. "My deputies found the place nearly deserted," Wilson reported grimly. "A few workers remained, but claimed no knowledge of Whitfield's whereabouts." "He's running," Tom surmised. Wilson shook his head. "I don't think so. A man like Whitfield doesn't run. He regroups." "You think he's coming here?" Katherine said, the realization dawning cold and clear. "Coming for us." "It's what I'd do in his position," Wilson admitted. "Cut off the threat at its source." The next 3 days passed in tense vigilance. Katherine and Tom remained in their rooms above the federal building, venturing out only under armed escort. Wilson doubled the guards and sent telegrams to neighboring settlements, alerting law enforcement to watch for Whitfield and his men. On the 4th day, as Katherine stood by the window watching rain fall on Denver's muddy streets, she spotted a familiar figure crossing the square toward the federal building. Her heart leaped to her throat. "Tom! It's him! It's Whitfield!" Tom was at her side in an instant, peering through the rain-streaked glass. Edward Whitfield walked openly, flanked by 2 men heading directly for the building's entrance. "He's surrendering?" Katherine asked incredulously. Tom's expression was grim. "I doubt it. This is some kind of trick." They heard commotion downstairs, voices raised, the heavy tread of boots on wooden floors. Then Wilson's voice, clear and authoritative. "Edward Whitfield, you are under arrest for land fraud, criminal intimidation, arson, and conspiracy to commit murder." Katherine and Tom exchanged glances of disbelief. Had it really been this simple in the end? The answer came moments later with the sound of gunshots. Tom pushed Katherine to the floor, covering her body with his as more shots rang out below. Shouting and the crash of furniture followed, then running footsteps on the stairs. "Stay down," Tom ordered, drawing his revolver and moving to position himself between Katherine and the door. The door burst open to reveal not Whitfield, but Marshall Wilson, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Out the back now," he barked. "It's a diversion. They're coming up the fire escape." Tom pulled Katherine to her feet, and they followed Wilson through a door that led to the building's rear staircase. As they descended, more gunfire erupted from above. "How many?" Tom asked as they reached the ground floor. "At least 6, Wilson replied grimly. "Whitfield came in the front with 2 men while the others circled around back. Clever bastard." They exited into a narrow alley behind the Federal Building. Rain fell in sheets, quickly soaking them as Wilson led them toward a stable at the end of the alley. "I've got horses ready," he explained. "You need to get out of Denver. I'll handle Whitfield." "We can't just run," Katherine protested. "You can and you will," Wilson snapped. "Whitfield came prepared for war. I need time to gather my deputies and end this properly. Until then, you two need to disappear." At the stable, 3 horses stood saddled and ready. Wilson handed Tom a sealed envelope. "Head northwest, toward the mining settlements in the mountains. I have a cabin about 30 miles out here." He tapped a location on a rough map. "Stay there until you receive word from me that it's safe to return." Tom clasped Wilson's hand. "Be careful, James. Whitfield's desperate now." "Desperate men make mistakes," Wilson replied. "That's how we'll get him." They mounted quickly, the horses skittish with the sound of distant gunfire. As they prepared to ride out, Katherine turned to Wilson. "Thank you for everything," the marshal nodded. "Go, and Godspeed." They rode hard through the rain, leaving Denver behind as thunder rumbled overhead. The storm provided cover for their escape, but made traveling treacherous, the trails turning to slick mud beneath their horses' hooves. By nightfall, they had covered about half the distance to Wilson's cabin. With darkness making further travel dangerous, they sought shelter in an abandoned trapper's hut Tom spotted near the trail. The hut was little more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was dry. Tom managed to start a small fire in the stone hearth while Katherine tended to the horses, securing them under a lean-to attached to the hut's side. "Do you think Wilson's all right?" she asked as they huddled near the fire, their clothes steaming as they dried. Tom's face was grave in the flickering light. "James is tough and smart. If anyone can handle Whitfield, it's him." "I hate that we had to run," Katherine admitted. "After everything, to still be fleeing." "It won't be forever," Tom promised, pulling her close. "One way or another, this ends soon." They spent a restless night in the hut, taking turns keeping watch. At first light, they continued their journey, the storm having passed to leave behind a landscape washed clean and vibrant with spring growth. Around midday, they crested a ridge that gave them a panoramic view of the mountains ahead. Tom reined in his horse, pointing to a plume of smoke rising from a valley about 5 miles distant. "Wilson's cabin, I think. We should reach it by early afternoon." The cabin proved to be more substantial than Katherine had expected, a solid structure of logs and stone with a corral for horses and a small stream running nearby. Inside, they found basic supplies and furnishings, evidence of Wilson's occasional retreats from the demands of his position. "We should be safe here for now," Tom said as he secured the cabin's shutters. "The location is known only to Wilson and a few trusted friends." Katherine moved to help him, checking the supplies and arranging what would be their temporary home. As she worked, a realization settled over her. Despite the danger, despite being forced to flee once again, she felt strangely at peace. With Tom beside her, even this isolated cabin in the wilderness felt like a kind of home. "What are you thinking?" Tom asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Katherine smiled. "That despite everything, I'm where I'm supposed to be." She crossed to him, placing her hands on his chest. "With you." Tom's arms encircled her, pulling her close. "When this is all over," he murmured against her hair, "I'm going to marry you properly. No more running, no more hiding." Promise? Katherine looked up at him, searching his face. Promise. Tom sealed his vow with a kiss that carried all the certainty his words had conveyed. They settled into a wary routine, always alert for any sign of pursuit. Tom hunted and fished, supplementing the cabin's supplies, while Katherine maintained their shelter and kept watch during his absences. Each day that passed without word from Wilson or sign of Whitfield's men brought both relief and increased tension. On the 7th day, as Katherine was hanging laundry to dry in the spring sunshine, she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of Denver. Her heart raced as she dropped the wet clothing and ran to where Tom was chopping wood. "Someone's coming," she said urgently. Tom immediately set aside his axe and retrieved his rifle from where it leaned against the cabin wall. "Get inside," he instructed. "Be ready to leave through the back if necessary." Katherine obeyed, but positioned herself near a window where she could see the approaching rider. As the figure drew closer, she recognized the federal marshal's uniform and felt a surge of hope. "Tom, I think it's one of Wilson's deputies." The rider proved to be Deputy Marshal Lawrence, a young man Katherine recognized from their time at the federal building. He brought news that left them stunned. Whitfield was dead. "Shot during his arrest," Lawrence explained as they sat around the cabin's table. "Marshal Wilson cornered him at a saloon outside Denver where he'd been hiding. Whitfield drew on him, gave him no choice." "And his men?" Tom asked. "Most surrendered once Whitfield went down. 2 tried to flee and were captured near the territorial border. 1 was killed, resisting arrest." Lawrence took a sip from the coffee Katherine had prepared. "It's over. Judge Hammond has already begun proceedings against Whitfield's associates, and the territorial governor has issued a statement condemning the land fraud scheme." "My father's ranch?" Katherine asked, hardly daring to hope. "The deed remains in your name, Miss Cole. Once the legal proceedings are complete, you'll be free to return and claim your property. The water rights will be restored as well." Tom reached for Katherine's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. "What about the damage?" "The house was burned." Lawrence nodded sympathetically. "The judge has ordered restitution from Whitfield's estate for all damages suffered by his victims. It won't bring back what was lost, but it should provide means to rebuild." That night, after Lawrence had departed with promises to send official notification once it was safe to return, Katherine and Tom sat on the cabin's porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "It doesn't seem real," Katherine said softly. "After all this time, all the running and fear, to have it end so suddenly." "Not an ending," Tom corrected. "A beginning." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "The question is, what do we want that beginning to look like?" Katherine considered the possibilities now open to them. "We could rebuild the ranch," she suggested. "Make it what my father always hoped it would be." Tom nodded. "We could. Or we could sell it, use the money to start fresh somewhere else." He paused, studying her face in the twilight. "What do you want, Katherine? Truly?" The answer came to her with surprising clarity. "I want a home," she said simply. "Not just a place, but a feeling. I want children someday. I want to teach them and watch them grow. I want mornings waking up beside you and evenings watching the sun set together." She smiled. "I want the everywhere you promised me." Tom's face softened with emotion. "Then that's what we'll have. Whether it's at your father's ranch or somewhere else entirely, we'll build that life together." 3 weeks later, they stood on the ridge overlooking what had once been the Cole Ranch. The charred remains of the house still stood as a grim reminder of all that had transpired, but spring had brought new growth to the land, wildflowers dotting the meadows, fresh grass covering the pastures, the creek running full and clear through the valley. "It's still beautiful," Katherine said, her voice catching. "Even after everything." Tom's arm tightened around her waist. "We can rebuild it, make it stronger than before." Over the next months, that's exactly what they did. The restitution money from Whitfield's estate provided funds for lumber and supplies. Neighbors, freed from Whitfield's tyranny, came to help raise the new house. Katherine reopened the small schoolhouse that had served the valley before Whitfield's arrival, while Tom worked alongside the builders, learning skills he'd never needed as a lawman. They married on a clear autumn day, with Marshall Wilson traveling from Denver to stand as Tom's best man, and Margaret Ellis coming from the mining settlement to support Katherine. The ceremony was held on the front porch of their newly completed home, with the valley spreading before them like a promise of all that was to come. That night, as they lay in their new bed in their new home, Katherine traced the lines of Tom's face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Happy?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied honestly. "When I first came west, I thought my life was ending. Then when the ranch burned, I was certain of it. And now?" Katherine smiled, thinking of all they had endured and overcome together. "Now I know it was just beginning." She nestled closer to him, her head finding its familiar place on his shoulder. "You kept your promise, you know." "Which one?" Tom asked, his fingers combing gently through her hair. "You took me everywhere, not by traveling to distant places, but by showing me all the possibilities life holds when you face it with courage and love." Tom's arms tightened around her. "And we're just getting started." 5 years later, the Cole Everett Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the territory. The house stood proud on its hillside, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals where cattle and horses grazed. The water that had once been the source of so much conflict now sustained not only their ranch, but through fair agreements with neighbors, much of the surrounding valley. Katherine divided her time between teaching at the valley's school, which had grown to 20 students, and caring for their daughter, Margaret, now 3 years old and already showing her mother's intelligence and her father's determination. A second child was on the way, kicking vigorously beneath Katherine's heart as she stood on the porch watching Tom return from checking the north pasture. He dismounted with the easy grace that still made her heart skip, tossing the reins to their young ranch hand before climbing the porch steps to greet her with a kiss. "How are my girls today?" he asked, his hand resting gently on her rounded belly. "Impatient," Katherine replied with a smile. "Both of us. Margaret has been asking when you'd be home since breakfast." As if summoned by her name, their daughter burst through the front door, her dark braids flying behind her. "Papa!" she cried, launching herself into Tom's waiting arms. "There's my little deputy," he said, swinging her high before settling her on his hip. "Have you been helping your mama today?" Margaret nodded seriously. "I helped with the washing and I practiced my letters." "She's nearly ready to read," Katherine said proudly. "Fastest learner in her class." Tom looked from his daughter to his wife, his eyes reflecting all the love and wonder Katherine felt herself. Just like her mother, then. That evening, after Margaret had been tucked into bed with stories of princesses who saved themselves and cowboys who kept their promises, Katherine and Tom sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge above their valley. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Katherine asked, her head resting against Tom's shoulder. "If Whitfield hadn't burned the ranch, if you hadn't happened to be in Redemption Creek that day." Tom was quiet for a moment, his arm warm and secure around her. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at what we've built, at Margaret, at you, and I can only be grateful for whatever twist of fate brought us together." Katherine nodded, understanding completely. The journey had been difficult, marked by fear and loss, but it had led them here to home, to family, to a love that continued to deepen with each passing day. "When I told you I had nowhere to go," she said softly, "I never imagined this was where everywhere would lead us." Tom pressed a kiss to her temple. "The best journeys are the ones we can't imagine until we're on them." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as their lives had. "And ours is still just beginning." As the night deepened around them and the future stretched before them full of promise, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that Tom was right. Their story, the one that had begun with desperation and a stranger's unexpected kindness, was far from over. It would continue to unfold day by day, year by year, written in the life they created together in this valley they now called home. And wherever that story led them next, they would face it as they had faced everything else, side by side, hand in hand, their love a constant in a world of change. For Katherine had learned that everywhere wasn't a place at all. It was a journey taken together, one that never truly ended as long as they walked it as one.